Hey guys, so just before this tutorial starts, I'd just like to say that my first big game project, Bodhi and Friends, will be coming out August 12th, so if you haven't wishlisted it yet, be sure to. The game will cost money and won't be free, so do keep that in mind. Bodhi and Friends is a mascot horror game centered around a game studio called Monster Crunch Interactive, and Bodhi is their mascot. As you play through the game, you'll begin to uncover the mystery surrounding the world of Bodhi and Friends and learn about the origins of the Friends and the history of Monster Crunch Interactive. Again, be sure to wishlist Bodhi and Friends on Steam now and consider buying it when it comes out. I've been working on this game for pretty much a year now and your support would mean so much. Anyways, back to the video. Hey, what's up guys, Omogonix here and welcome back to a brand new Unity tutorial here on the channel, where today I'll be teaching you guys how to do basic third-person player movement in Unity using C#. That includes being able to make our player move in all directions, both walking and sprinting, and plus our player will be able to jump up and down as well. So if you guys do enjoy this tutorial, or you do learn something from it, be sure to like, comment and subscribe for more, and let's get right into it. So before we do get started, I am going to show you guys the end result of what we'll be achieving today, so you guys do get an idea of how this will look, so let's do that. Alrighty, so here we have our player, and as you can see I am currently able to move in pretty much any direction I want. I can rotate with the A and D keys and move forwards and backwards with the W and S keys, and then when I press down left shift I can sprint. And then last but not least, when I press down the space key, I can jump. I'm pretty sure in my previous player movement tutorials, I've never actually taught how to do jumping before, so if you're someone who wants to learn how to make your player jump, well don't worry, this tutorial will have you covered, and it is pretty easy too. So yeah, hopefully by the end of the tutorial you guys have something similar to this. Now before we do get to the scripting side of things for this tutorial, I am going to show you guys how to set up everything in scene first. So first up of course, you want to make sure you have a ground for your player to stand on. So I've just got a cube which I've scaled out so then it's big enough for my player to stand on. If you guys already have like a map already built out for your player, that's totally fine. But in case you don't, what I recommend you do is you just go Game Object, 3D Object, and then Cube, and then you grab yourself out a cube, and then you use the scale tool to then scale it so then it's big enough for your player to stand on. Next up, what I have here of course is the player. Now my player is just a capsule with a cube attached to it, and the reason as to why there's a cube attached to my player is so then I know which direction it's facing. So if you're using like a custom model for your player, that's totally fine. I won't be teaching how to do animations in this tutorial, this will just be for like the scripting side of things, but I may do a tutorial in the future where I teach how to like add animations onto this or something. It's just that I more wanted to teach how to do the scripting side of third-person player movement, so yeah. But if you haven't got out an object for your player yet, I do recommend that you get out a capsule by going Game Object, 3D Object, and Capsule, since that'll be the best thing to use for testing out the third-person player movement. And then of course, I suggest you maybe attach a cube to your capsule, so then you know which way it's facing. So anyways, once you have your player in your scene, what you want to do of course is you want to make sure that it has a collider of some kind. Now I recommend using a capsule collider. What you do is you select your player and then you go add component. You just click the add component button down here and then you search up collider, and then you'll have a bunch of different colliders show up. Now whichever collider works for you, I guess use that. I recommend either using a box collider or capsule collider. I'm using a capsule collider for this tutorial, so yeah. And then of course you want to have a rigid body variable, since this will be how our player moves. We'll be using the rigid body for the movement. And how you add a rigid body to your player is you want to select your player, and then you want to click the add component button and then search rigid body, and then boom, you click on that and then you add your rigid body. Once you add your rigid body to your player, you want to freeze the rotations on it, but not the position. The reason as to why we want to freeze the rotations is so then our player just doesn't flop around and stuff like that. We'll be using another method of rotation for rotating our player. We won't be using the rigid body, so it doesn't matter if we freeze all the rotations. And then when it comes to the positions, you want to make sure that these are unfrozen so then our player can actually move. Since if you were to freeze your player's positions, then you wouldn't actually be able to move. And then last but not least attached to our player is the player script. Now we'll be getting to this in a bit, but here we have our variables such as the movement speed, which will determine how fast our player moves, the jump speed, which will determine how fast or high our player jumps, however you want to word that, the rotation speed, which determines how fast our player rotates, then the raycast distance, which is used for the jumping. So basically how the jumping works, right, is there's a raycast which shoots down from the player, and if that raycast is hitting an object beneath it, then the player can jump. If it's not hitting anything beneath it, then the player can't jump, so yeah. And then we have the sprint add amount, which is how much speed is added onto the movement speed when the player is sprinting. And then we have a player rigid body variable for the player's rigid body. And then we have a layer mask variable. Now what this is used for is it's used for the raycast, and it's used to make sure that the raycast doesn't detect certain objects we don't want it to detect. For example, I don't want my raycast to detect my player, so what I've done is I've actually created a new layer called player. And if you want to add a new layer to any objects in your scene, by the way, what you do is you select that particular object. In my case, it's the player. And then you go up to the layer tab here, you click this, and then you go add layer. And then what you can do is then you can type in a new layer wherever you like, and yeah. And then I'm pretty sure you press enter. And then once you do that, you then select your player again, or whatever object you want to add a layer to. And then you click on this tab again, and then you apply that particular layer. And then you go yes, change children, which basically means that it applies that layer to the children objects of that particular object. And then you go yes, or you can go no if you want to as well, and then yeah, the layer will be set on that object. And so what you do to make sure that your raycast doesn't hit certain layers is you click on this drop down menu, and then you basically tick the layers that you want your raycast to be able to hit, but then anything that's not ticked will be a layer that your raycast can't hit. So for example, my raycast won't be able to hit anything on the player layer. So that's how all the variables are and what they do. Another thing you'll want to make sure of that you have in your scene is a camera, so then you can actually watch your player move around and stuff. So how you get out a camera is you go game object and then camera, and then that will add a camera to your scene. And then once adding your camera to your scene, all you'll need to do is position and rotate it how you like, and then yeah. Now upon creating a new scene in a Unity project, it should already have a few components such as a directional light and a main camera, so you should already have a camera upon starting your scene, but in case you don't have a camera for whatever reason, because you deleted it or something, how you get it back is you go game object and then camera, and then yeah. Something else you can do as well is you can actually make your camera a child object of the player, so then it does follow your player around. So how I actually have the camera right now, right? So how I actually have the camera right now is so then it's just watching the player as I move around. So the camera doesn't actually follow the player, it just sits and watches it. But something you can do if you like is you can grab your camera and then drag it underneath your player, so then it becomes a child object of the player. And then you can actually have your camera follow around your player as you move. So if you want to do this, you can as well. And then as I jump around and move around and stuff like that, the camera will follow along with the player. So if you want to do that, you can. So now how about we actually go into the script itself so I can show you guys how it all works. And also, to make things easier for this tutorial as well, the script is already all written out. I've already written out the whole script, and I've even added comments throughout the script as well, so as I explain how each line of the script works, you guys can actually just read off the comments and get a better idea of how it works that way as well. And also, when you're done watching the tutorial and you need a reminder of how certain things work, you can always look back on these comments to see oh yeah, so the can jump ball, that means that that determines if the player can jump or not. Okay, now I understand that, you know, stuff like that. So yeah. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through line by line and explain basically how all this works, so then you guys can fully understand it. And hopefully you guys do find this to be an easy way of learning. If you guys do prefer me to write up the script as I'm recording the tutorial, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Or if you do prefer this way where I have the script already written up, then be sure to let me know down in the comments below as well, since I do want to make sure that these tutorials are as easy for you guys to digest as possible, and yeah. Alright, so without further ado, let's go through line by line. So first up we have the public float variables. Now when a variable is public, what this means is that other scripts can interact with it, and also you can actually access it within the Unity editor as well. So for example, if I click back on my player and I take a look at the player script here, as you can see there are all these variables such as the movement speed, jump speed, etc. And you can all access these publicly and edit the values as you wish. So yeah, that's what a public variable is. It's basically a variable in which you can edit its values publicly. So even this player rigid body variable, for example, you can access this publicly and just change whatever rigid body you want to be in here, and yeah. So yeah, that's how public variables work. And then floats, what they are is they're basically like a number with decimal points. So integers are basically just whole numbers, and then floats are numbers that have decimals. So for example, like 5.5 or 7.237 or something like that. Basically, that's what a float is. You can do whole numbers for floats as well. For example, if you look at my movement speed and jump speed and stuff like that, they're just whole numbers. You don't have to do decimal places if you don't want to, but it does give you the option to by using a float. So yeah, we have our public float variables here, and what these are is our movement speed, which determines how fast the player moves, the jump speed, which determines how high or how fast the player jumps, however you want to word that, and then the rotation speed, which determines how fast a player rotates. Alright, so next up we have a public float variable for the raycast distance. Now the raycast distance determines how long the raycast it detects if the player is touching the ground is. So as I explained earlier on in the video, basically how the player jumps is there'll be a raycast shooting down from underneath the player, and if that raycast is hitting anything, like an object of any kind, then the player can jump. However, if the raycast isn't hitting anything, then the player can't jump. And then the raycast distance determines the length of that raycast. So then next up we have the sprint add amount. Now the sprint add amount is the amount that is added onto the movement speed when the player sprints. So when the player holds down left shift, the sprint add amount will be added on top of the movement speed. So for example, as you can see here, my movement speed is set to 4 and my sprint add amount is set to 4. So basically my player's sprinting speed will be 8. So next up we have a float for the original speed. Now what this basically is it's the player's walking / starting speed. So at the start of the scene, the original speed will equal to movement speed. So then when our player stops sprinting, the movement speed will equal to the original speed that it was at the start of the scene. So yeah, that's what the original speed's used for. It's used to store the walking speed of the player at the start of the scene. So then we have a public rigid body variable for the player's rigid body. So you all know what the rigid body is. I was talking about that before. And then we have a bool. So what a bool is basically it's something that can equal to true or false. So this bool in particular is called can jump. So if can jump equals to true, that means that the player can jump. And if it equals to false, then the player can't jump. So then next up we have the public layer mask variable. Now I explained earlier what the layer mask is, but I'll explain a bit again. So basically what the layer mask is used for is it's used to make sure our raycast doesn't detect layers you don't want it to detect. So in my case, for example, as I was explaining earlier, I don't want my raycast to detect the player, just in case it causes any issues with the raycast being able to detect the ground or anything like that. So yeah. So that's what the layer mask is used for. And then here we have a start void. Now voids, what they are in Unity is just functions. Now you can create a void of any kind, like if you wanted to, you could make a void called void Minecraft Steve or something like that, whatever you wanted to, right? But Unity itself has these predefined voids such as void start, void fixed update, and void update, which all have their own, basically their own purposes. So for example, the start void, what that's used for is it's used to make actions happen at the start of a scene. Then the fixed update void, that's used for physics calculations. It keeps physics related stuff consistent at any frame rate. And then the update void is where actions will happen every frame. So basically it's just stuff updating on every frame. And yeah, so there's more voids that Unity has, such as void on collision enter, void on trigger enter, stuff like that, stuff which you've probably seen in my previous tutorials if you've watched them before, but yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to quickly explain how voids work, in case you didn't know, and now we can continue on. So here we have the start void. So at the start of the scene, the original speed will equal to the movement speed. And then here in the fixed update void, which is used for physics calculations, here we have a float called vertical input. Now vertical input gets the player's vertical input. Now what the player's vertical input is it's basically your forwards and backwards movements, so whether you're pressing the W or S keys or not. And then we have a vector-free variable called movement. Now what this does is it basically determines the player's movement direction based on the vertical input. So if our player's pressing on the W key, our player will be moving forwards. If our player's pressing on the S key, they'll be moving backwards. So transform.forward multiplied by the vertical input basically means that the player will move forwards or backwards depending on the player's vertical input. And then that's multiplied by the movement speed, so then our player is moving at the rate of our movement speed. So now here we have movement.y. Now what movement refers to is this vector-free variable up here. So we have movement.y. Now the .y refers to the y-axis of the movement variable, since this is a vector-free variable. So movement.y will equal to player rigid body.velocity.y. Now what this refers to is the player's y velocity, so how fast they're going when they're up, because the y-axis basically points up, so based on the player's y velocity, that's what movement.y will equal to. So then here we have player rigid body.velocity equals to movement. So what this does is it basically makes sure that our player's rigid body's velocity equals to what's going up here with the movement variable, because as you guys know from what I explained before, the movement variable up here determines the movement direction of the player based on the vertical input. So then our player's rigid body here, the velocity of it will then equal to movement, so then our player rigid body can actually move. So here we have a bool called touching ground, which will equal to true or false, depending on whether the raycast is hitting the ground or not. So let's say, for example, you're standing on the ground or a table or something like that, and your raycast is hitting it, then touching ground will equal to true, but if your raycast isn't hitting anything, then touching ground will equal to false. So then can jump will equal to touching ground, meaning that if touching ground equals to true, can jump will equal to true. And if touching ground equals to false, then can jump will equal to false. And then here we have the update void, so as I explained earlier, this is where stuff will happen every frame. That's what this void's used for. So if can jump equals to true, and if the player presses down the space key, force will be applied to the rigid body, so then it moves up at the rate of the jump speed. So we have vector-free.up multiplied by the jump speed, so then the player moves up multiplied by the jump speed. And then we have force mode.impulse, which basically indicates that we want our player to just jump straight up. So it's just like an impulsive thing. And then after that we have if input.get key down keycode.left shift. So if the player presses down the left shift key, then movement speed will equal to movement speed plus sprint add amount. So basically what that does is it adds the sprint add amount onto the movement speed. So then in my case, since my movement speed equals to 4 and the sprint add amount equals to 4, my movement speed will now equal to 8 when sprinting. And then if our player lets go of the left shift key, movement speed will equal to original speed, so then it moves back at the rate of what it would be when walking. And then we have a float for the rotation input, which basically gets the player's horizontal axis. So what this refers to is the A and D keys. So if you're pressing down the A key, then your player will rotate left, and if you're pressing down the D key, then your player will rotate right. So then here we have transform.rotate. Now what transform refers to is our player's transform, and then it will rotate on its y-axis based on the rotation input multiplied by rotation speed multiplied by time.delta time. Now what time.delta time does is it basically makes sure that our player rotates at the same speed at any frame rate. So if we're playing at 60 FPS, our player will be rotating at the same speed as it would at, say, 30 FPS. So the reason as to why we have the zeros here is because we don't want our player rotating on the X or Z axis, since you know, we want our player rotating left and right, no other way. So basically we only have the player rotating on its Y axis, since that's left and right. Alright, so that's pretty much the whole script. Hopefully I explained that well enough. And now that I'm done explaining this script, now we can actually go back into the scene. Also, I should have done this earlier, but I'll show you guys now anyway, just in case you don't know how. But in case you're new to Unity or something like that, and you don't know how to make a C# script, what you do is you just right-click in your project folder, and then you go create, and then C# script, and then boom, that creates a C# script. And then yeah, and then to open it, you just double-click it, and then boom. Also, for anyone who's interested and wants to use this script for reference, this script will be found in the description of this tutorial. So if you go down into the description of this video, you'll be able to find a link to this script so you guys can use it for reference and stuff like that. And yeah. Alrighty, so once you get your script done, what you want to do is you want to select your player, and then you want to apply your script to your player. Now, there's a few different ways to apply your script to your player. You could either just click onto your script in your project folder, and then drag it over to the player object on the hierarchy to the left, or you could select your player and then drag your script over to your player's inspector menu. That's another way of doing it. Either that, or there's a third way of doing it, and then that's by selecting your player and then going add component and then just searching up your script's name, in which then you'll be able to add that. So once you add your script to your player, you want to fill in all the variables, of course, so fill in the movement speed, jump speed, rotation speed, etc. So for example, I've got my movement speed set to 4, jump speed set to 8, rotation speed set to 150, my raycast distance is set to 1.5, and then my sprint add amount is set to 4. And then I've got my player rigid body here, of course, and then I've got my layer mask in which my player layer won't be detected. But if you guys want to have all your layers detected, you can do that as well if you want to, just select everything, but yeah. And then once you get all that done, once you test out your player, it should then work. And yeah. Alrighty, so that's pretty much the end of this tutorial. Hopefully you guys did enjoy it. You know, this tutorial has taken me quite a bit of time to record since I've been wanting to perfect it, and yeah, I want to make sure that my tutorials are as good as possible, of course, and just that they're as easy to understand as possible. I'm always trying to improve with my tutorials and get better, so yeah, I want to just make sure that my tutorials are really good, you know what I mean? Or just as good as they can be. So yeah, if you guys did enjoy this tutorial or you did learn something from it, be sure to like, comment and subscribe for more. And I'll see you all soon in my next one. Bye-bye.